Welcome back to Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, and in this one it's about mapping the TCA throttle to the CRJ. Alright, let's hop inside and get started. Inside the sim, and we've got our SPAD.NEXT open. Now the usual thing, I'm running Alpha 9.10.14. I have the LVAR bridge installed, and of course I am using LVARs and a mix of other data. When we come in to control the axes, let's just look at what we're doing to the throttles themselves. So what you'll notice is there are the little virtual buttons, and there are some that we're going to apply events to. We did not apply any events to the virtual buttons in any of the detent locations. Now, one of the things I don't like is this detent is like halfway down the throttle. It should have been this one up here and this one brought way up here. What I end up doing is trying to calibrate it so that when this is in that detent location, the values come out correct. So we're going to learn how to do that today. When we select the TCQ engine 1 and 2, we click on the axis, we're able to add events. And it's important with this one to understand that the buttons on the side of the throttles are part of the whole axis selection. So there's putting the axis assignment, and then there's the button on the side of it that you can't see. So those show up here. You'll notice that for the button pressed, I went with the ASCRJ throttle quadrant toga 1. Set the LVAR to 1, which will press the value. But to make the button actually move and click, we then also set toga 1 animation to 1. Delay execution, this could have been just 100 milliseconds even, doesn't matter. And then set it back to 0. So the button goes in, button comes out. Where this gets a little special in the way I decided to approach this was I found it very difficult to get a good range using the actual dropping of the throttle into that reverse range. So inside of the CRJ, when you get to that point, I find I actually need a range somewhere in here where it's like this is all idle and then it starts, because what you're going to end up seeing is this range in here as we move around, it's real sensitive because of the Hall effect sensors having such a wide range, and no matter what you do, you really don't get the exact same value twice. So normally you'd click on it, and a lot of people do this. They go to a standard axis, and that standard axis, they pick a throttle, even without reverser. The problem is those use the older SimConnect ones that don't necessarily move the animation in the cockpit, and the throttles don't even get set properly. They can get to 75%. It's really strange. So instead, what I found I needed to do was click on that, add an event, and do a custom axis. So we went with a custom axis. So if I click on that first axis, so what I did was I set my first one up, and I said I wanted a range definition. And so what I did was I said range definition, yes. And I moved the throttle just a little past the actual idle stop, and then I hit the set button. And then I went all the way to the end, and I hit set for the maximum. And the reason for this is I was trying to create a dead zone. I want to create one. I want it to be a little bit behind where I want this to actually start moving, so I can get onto that idle stop. Now, to do that, we have to take this range and then we rescale it to the axis value. Now, when you use a normal axis, it'll send a range of minus 16,383, which would be 0, to 16,384, which will be 100%. So this is what we want this to map this new range to. Now, we needed to target the throttle. So the easiest way for me to find this was I just came in and I typed in throttle, and there were all kinds of throttles. And I went to the Microsoft 2020 and throttle axis set EX1. And so this is what seemed to change with some other stuff, and I found it worked really well. So I chose it. It seems like this is for sending commands externally into Microsoft Flight Sim, and they just work. It works, it ties it all in, and I don't get surges or weird stuff. So we went with that as the value. And then I wanted to use the axis value, but I wanted the raw value because I want to rescale it. I inverted it because technically it interpreted the value backwards. So when I didn't have this on and we moved it, it was going in the opposite direction. So when I saw that it was going kind of backwards, I just clicked on it. I clicked on Invert Axis, and then I found it went in the right direction. So looking at this, I would say you get your axes, you set the value, raw value, invert axis, then you come up here, range definition, and like I did, I got it a little bit ahead. Now you could also type in these values, but I just moved it a little bit ahead and then hit set. And then went all the way to the end stop and hit set. And then this was easy to hard code. What did I do next to try to create a range of a dead zone? So I added an event and I added another custom axis. But in this one, what I did was I set a range definition from 2138. So I basically just typed in that value as somewhere up here like that. Hit set. So that's the top. Then I went over the gate and I came down just a bit into this range, right? Basically just enough to get over the top and before it hits that yellow button. So I typed it in about 1142. Either way, it doesn't matter. But I came down a bit and I hit that. And then what we did for the rescale is we said that the whole time it's in this range, just set it to basically 0. 16 minus 16,383, which is 0, just the whole time. Any of those values, just basically keep it the same. Same axes, again, on, so it flips it over. And then what I had done is I basically made it so that this lower area shows up as a switch event. So that virtual button shows up as a switched on, switched off. And what I chose to do, because if you repeated the value, it'll toggle back and forth between cut. So what I did was I essentially set up send the event throttle 1 decrease, delay execution. Throttle 1 decrease, delay execution. So I did this 5 times. And that will move it from 0 to minus 25, which gets you into the full reverse range. And instead of it just going straight into reversers, it gives you that slight feeling of it ramping up. It'll stay in that full reverse thrust. And when the switch comes off, so when we move it forward off of that, it's going to send the throttle 1 cut command and effectively set it to 0. And because we have that dead zone, we kind of just stay in idle until we get it a little bit forward. So that's really all we had to do for getting these dialed in. Now we came over and we did the exact same thing on the right side. And again, you could just copy, paste, change the LVARs. And then of course we had to dial it in slightly different because these don't really, these don't maintain the same values. They're not perfectly matched. They're slightly off. which isn't a big deal because you can go ahead and dial it all back in and you end up with the exact same result. So I had the axis change. I just tweaked the values, copy pasted, changed to axis 2, and changed this from axis throttle 1 to axis throttle 2. And then I tweaked my froms and my twos, and I got them dialed in just the way I needed. Now, for me, I decided to use these switches as my means to deal with the throttle cutoffs. So when the switch is on, it's going to set the TQ cutoff 1 LVAR to 1, so it presses the button to move it from 0 to 1, and I send the LVAR of the throttle 1 position, so we set it to 400. So the LVAR for the throttles as to physically where their positions are can be tracked. 400 is the bottom and 450 is the cutoff. So what we do is we send the TQ cutoff 1, which is what flips the switch up for that moment, and then of course it's a timer, it'll go back down. So we've basically flipped the switch, and then we can set to 450 and it will drop back in. Same thing coming out, we need to flip the switch and then we can set 400 and it'll allow us to pop it up. Then what I did was I used the crank switch to set some information. So if continuous ignition is set to 0, we'll hit it with a 1 when it's set into continuous mode. And then vice versa, when we go into normal mode, if it's set to 1, we'll hit it again. Otherwise, we'll leave it alone. So again, we can toggle in and out. Because the other thing is we're using this switch to help us with the starter buttons. So when the switch has button 8, which is this guy when it's in start mode, so when 8 is active, which is, that's 8, this is 7, normal is actually neither one on. It's basically really like 2 little buttons. So what happens is we're going to say if it is enabled in a 1, then when we push this button, we get the starter. If it's in 0 state, so it's sitting in normal, then pressing the button again will actually be the equivalent of sending the stop command. So during the engine startup process, while the FADEC is doing its thing, if you saw something you didn't like, you would press the stop button. So what I basically did was I set it up so that I would put this into start, I would press the button to start it, then I would move it into normal mode in case I needed to cancel or stop the startup procedure. And then once that engine is complete, I go back into start mode, and then we move on over and do the same thing on the left button. So this will start the left engine. When it spools up, I then move this to normal, getting ready to cancel it if it's a bad start. As I see the N2 come up to 21, then I flick the engine 1 switch forward to put fuel into the engine and start it up. So that's how I use those. That is everything that I've done with the throttle portion of the quadrant. If you're still sticking with me, great. Let's move on to the add-on portion. We added the axis offset CRJ spoiler set. And what was really neat here is we didn't need to do range definition, but we did need to do a rescale definition from 0 to 100. And here we use the raw value and the axis value, and this was perfectly dialing in our spoilers. And you'll see that in this case, we did not need to use any of the virtual buttons for the positions. On the flap handle side of things, hey, I was able to use the standard auto detent flaps. just positioned it up, hit the full up, positioned it all the way down. I hit the full down, and away it went. So it's nice is that first detent gets you to 1, that second detent gets you to 8. Somewhere in the middle of the second to third gets you 20. You're hitting 30 on the third detent, and then you're into 45 with the full. The only reason why this is working right now when you see this is because I was already set to it. If I called this up, hit flaps detent, and started doing this, it wouldn't have moved until after setting this, I clicked OK the first time. And then once clicking OK, we came here, then we would see it moving. Now when I go back in as well to manipulate it, it's still going to be bound to it. But I do know that sometimes it gets confusing that you've attached it, you start playing with it, you're like, why isn't it moving? It's not moving because you haven't actually set that value in SPAD.NEXT yet. Parking brake works great. So if we look down here, again, switched on, we want to set the LVAR for the parking brake to 1. When switched off, set the parking brake, the LVAR for the parking brake to 0. For auto brakes, I actually use this for the spoiler mode. I've got it set to our spoilers. So there's disarmed, there's auto, and then there is manual. So there's my auto position. Away we go. Gear handle, gear up event, gear down event. Now, sadly, for some reason, the animation moves, controller knows it's going, but right now, this doesn't seem to actually be sending the event. I've got this knob over here right now. So I've got the gear up and I got the gear down attached to it for now. Sitting in the middle button, we have not attached anything to this. That's it. That's everything that we need to do within the CRJ when it comes to mapping these two pieces. So when you're calibrating the throttle, this is how I set mine up. Yes, it's a dual axis, but I set it to not having the reverser. You kind of need like an idle upper and an idle lower, and then a, you know, reverse start and a reverse max. Or at least mark that idle lower is where reverse start happens, and idle upper is right before it starts the range of actually giving you power. You kind of need a dead zone with this controller because of the amount of, like when you watch those values move, like just touching them, they move a lot because of how sensitive these controllers are, which is great. They give us a lot of steps and a lot of flexibility. So I did the same thing. I just basically brought them down to that idle position, which, as you can see, both in our case are actually setting it to minus 16,384. And that's why reverse is set at minus 16,384. We're using the other piece to actually move it, and that's why they're grayed out. Can't use it. So I brought it just forward, right? And then that's where we set and hit our set buttons for our idles. So I brought them just forward. That way when they rested down, they always clicked in place. And then I went up to my second detent, and that was where I basically found the detent, and I hit set for both those. I moved just forward of the detent. I hit set for toga, and then I went all the way and I hit set. That's how I did these. And then you hit the validate, and then you hit the OK. So I'm not changing anything, so we're not going to do much. But that's what I did, and I found I got myself with my detents in. So this is where I like my climb detent to be. I like having a lot of range for the manual thrust. Plus, they're detents anyway. So just above climb, right, it's automatically going to kick into toga. And then pushing it all the way forward, it gets to max power. So that works for me. That was the way I did it. And as always, we should publish these. So we're going to go ahead. We're going to publish this. And I'm going to do the usual. We're going to do the complete device and selected aircraft. Yep, we're going to do it for all the CRJs we've got. That's a TCA TQ. We'll go ahead and submit that. So we've published it. That's how you can find it, right? Come into your TQ, click on it, go to online snippets, right? We're going to look for TCQ engine, right? We want the complete device, and there we go. And if it doesn't show up, different aircraft, uncheck aircraft. Hey, look, now you find my 320 for it. So there you go. It's posted. That's how you get your hands on it. You'd click OK. It's going to bring it in, right? It's going to replace all events. You hit yes. But remember, you're going to have to figure out your own axis ranges to make sure. So you're going to have to come in afterwards and make sure that these make sense. Because as you saw, even between these two controls, those values are slightly different. So you just have to work those pieces yourself. Let's go ahead and do the same thing. Let's publish that. There we go. TCA add-on, complete device, only selected aircraft. These ones, yep, we're good. And let's go ahead and submit. Hit close. There it is. So same thing. Come in, press any button. You're going to click on online snippets. And you're going to go for the TCA complete device. And there is our CRJ add-on. That's it for this one. As always, thanks for the input. Thanks for reaching out and asking me to do specific ones. Sometimes I have no idea what people want to see. So thanks for watching and have a great day.